Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving straight into a classic text that's actually surprisingly relevant for how we work and manage right now.
That's right. Yeah, we're opening up Andrew S. Grove's High Output Management. And, it's not just a book about running a factory, it's really a foundational guide packed with principles on productivity and management from someone who, well, built Intel.
Right, a legend. And our mission today is really to grab the absolute core insights from the introduction and those really crucial early chapters.
hmm
Think of this as like distilling Grove's wisdom into actionable nuggets, a shortcut maybe, to understanding concepts that can make a profound difference in how you approach your own work or lead a team, or even just navigate your career in this world that keeps getting faster.
Yeah, more competitive too. We're pulling out the most impactful ideas and framing them specifically for you, the listener. It's like we're walking through the source material together, highlighting what really truly matters.
Okay, so let's start by setting the stage a bit. Grove first wrote this book way back in the early 80s, updated in mid-90s. The world was changing rapidly even then, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And he identified two massive shifts that were changing the game.
Okay, what were they?
Well, the first one was globalization. His point was basically business no longer respects national borders. Capital, labor, work itself. It could all move anywhere on the planet to find the most efficient way to get something done.
And the consequence he saw from that.
Global competition. I mean, not just for companies, but for individual jobs. He tells that great story about his Patagonia jacket,
Oh yeah, the American design, American company.
but assembled in China. It just perfectly illustrated that if a job can be done effectively somewhere else, potentially cheaper, it probably will be.
Which means your skills are competing globally.
Exactly. Competing with everyone, everywhere who can do that job. And as Grove put it, a lot of those competitors are very hungry.
Okay, so globalization was the first big shift. What was the second?
The information revolution, which back then was really kicked off by email.
Right. Seems basic now, but it fundamentally changed the speed and reach of communication, didn't it?
Totally. Days turned into minutes. You could suddenly share information easily with tons of people instantly.
He makes that interesting point about older Japanese offices.
Yeah, the open plan, the communal tables, giving them a natural communication edge before email kind of leveled the playing field globally. Digital communication just spread information faster and wider.
And it wasn't just email, was it? He saw everything going digital.
Everything. Sound, images, finance. Anything digital travels instantly.
Hmm.
He uses that fascinating example of the post office digitizing scribbled addresses.
And sending the image off somewhere cheaper just to type it in. Wild.
It really hammers home his point. With everything going digital and global, there are basically no hiding places anymore for inefficiency, for mediocrity, in any line of work.
So these two forces combine, globalization and the information revolution. They create a much less predictable workplace.
Yeah.
Less gentle, maybe?
That's exactly his point. And the conclusion is pretty stark. Companies and the people in them have to adapt or, well, risk becoming obsolete. It demands a higher tolerance for disorder.
Which explains his motto, that famous line he introduces early on. Let chaos reign, then reign in chaos.
hmm You have to sort of embrace the turbulence, but then actively work to impose structure on it.
So who is this actually for? Who's he writing for? He talks about the middle manager, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He calls them the muscle and bone of any sizable organization, often forgotten, stuck between the front lines and the top brass.
But he broadens that definition pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
To include what he calls know-how managers.
Exactly. These are your experts, your specialists, engineers, marketers, teachers, researchers, people who influence others and drive results mainly through their specialized knowledge and skill.
Even if they don't have, like, direct authority over a big team.
Right, and he saw their importance just growing and growing in this more complex, knowledge-based world we're in, which is certainly true today.
So the key takeaway here for you, listening, regardless of your job title, is that Grove basically frames you as a kind of micro CEO.
Yeah, the CEO of your own area, your team, your domain. You have the power to significantly improve performance and productivity right where you are. You don't need to wait for some big company initiative. You own it.
And what's really cool is how he grounds this whole approach in just three fundamental ideas.
Yeah.
He applies these like manufacturing principles to any kind of work.
He calls them the three basics. First is that output-oriented approach, bringing the discipline of measuring and optimizing production, factory-style thinking, to every single job.
Okay, output focus. What's second?
Second, viewing management as a team sport. recognizing that a manager's real output isn't just what they do, it's the output of the entire organization they influence, their team, the groups they coordinate with.
Got it. And the third?
The third is about eliciting peak performance from individuals. Like a sports coach, how do you get the absolute best out of people? How do you tap into that drive for continuous improvement?
Okay, those are the three pillars. Let's spend some time on that first one because it's so central. Applying production principles. He uses that brilliant analogy, the breakfast one.
The breakfast factory. Yeah, it's such a simple, sticky way to illustrate complex ideas.
So the task is, serve a 3-minute boiled egg, toast, and coffee, all hitting the table at the same time. Fresh, hot. Sounds easy.
But doing it reliably day after day requires managing a process. And that process has basic requirements, right? You need to deliver what the customer wants on schedule with acceptable quality and ideally at the lowest possible cost.
So how do you actually manage that? What's the first step?
The first crucial principle Grove introduces is identifying the limiting step. What's the bottleneck? What takes the longest?
In the breakfast scenario, it's the egg, right? It takes 3 minutes to boil.
Exactly. So you have to build your entire timing plan around that critical time-sensitive step. Everything else needs to fit around the egg finishing on time.
And this applies everywhere, not just breakfast. He uses that college recruiting example.
Right. The limiting step there, often the most expensive and time-consuming part, is the candidate's trip to the plant for interviews. It costs a lot, takes up valuable people's time.
So how do you manage that limiting step effectively?
You screen candidates efficiently before that expensive step. Phone interviews, maybe online assessments now, whatever it takes to ensure that only the most promising candidates actually make that costly trip. That way, you increase your output, successful hires, for that critical limiting step.
Okay, find the limiting step. Then what?
Then you use time offsets. You work backward from your deadline. When does that breakfast absolutely have to hit the table, hot and fresh?
Okay.
And then you figure out, based on the limiting step, the egg, when each other step must start. When do you pop the toast in? When do you pour the coffee? When do you grab the tray? Everything gets staggered, offset from that final delivery time based on how long each thing takes.
So you're essentially reverse engineering the schedule.
Precisely. And you can apply this to any project. What's the final deadline? What's the critical path, the limiting step? Then you plan backward, scheduling all the necessary actions based on their dependencies and durations. It's fundamental project management, really, but framed through this production lens.
Grove also breaks down the actual activities within any process into 3 basic types, doesn't he?
Yeah, the 3 fundamental production operations: process, assembly, and test.
Okay, define those.
Process is when you physically or chemically change something. Boiling the egg, analyzing data, writing code. Assembly is when you combine components, putting the egg, toast, coffee on the tray, compiling different software modules. And test is examining characteristics for quality, looking to see if the toast is burnt, checking the egg's consistency, reviewing a report, running software tests.
And any task involves these, basically. Writing a report, developing software.
Pretty much. And he makes the point that rework, having to fix mistakes, is almost always a direct result of a failure in one of these steps earlier in the flow. You miss something in process, assembly, or test.
Now, real-world processes obviously get more complicated. He talks about limited capacity, right? Like the toaster.
Exactly. If you only have one toaster, but suddenly you need toast for 3 different breakfast orders at once, that toaster queue becomes the new bottleneck, the limiting step, even if the egg still takes 3 minutes. Constraints can shift your bottleneck.
Which forces trade-offs. How do you deploy your resources, people, equipment, inventory, to balance speed, cost, quality when you hit those constraints?
Right. And Grove argues there's usually a right answer, or at least a most cost-effective way. The key is to think analytically, quantitatively as possible about those relationships, even if you're not literally timing things with a stopwatch. Understand the trade-offs.
What about scaling up, like a high-volume factory?
Well, a continuous high-volume operation, like an assembly line, can often achieve lower costs and more predictable quality. But the trade-off is flexibility. It's harder to change things quickly.
And there's a risk, too, isn't there? A single point of failure.
Big risk. If something goes wrong, say the water temperature for the eggs is off, you could potentially ruin everything currently in process. A whole batch could be wasted.
Which brings us to the need for inspection. Managing risk, ensuring quality.
Yes. And this ties into another crucial concept, adding value. As material moves through the process, it becomes more valuable.
How so?
Well, a raw egg costs pennies. A perfectly boiled egg is worth more. A complete hot breakfast delivered on time is worth the most to the customer. Value is added at each step.
Okay, and the rule that comes from that.
The absolutely critical rule: detect and fix problems at the lowest value stage possible.
Find the rotten egg before you boil it.
Exactly. Reject it when it arrives from the supplier. Lowest value. Don't wait until it's boiled, more value added. And definitely don't wait until it's on the customer's plate. Highest value, maximum waste, and dissatisfaction.
Same for the recruiting example.
Yep. Screen the candidate before the expensive plant visit. Find the software bug during unit testing, not after the product has shipped and been sold by thousands of users. You reject or fix before investing further value.
He applies this production lens in some pretty provocative ways, too, like the criminal justice system example.
Right. Now, it's important to stress this is purely his analytical model using these production principles. He's not making a social or ethical commentary here, just applying the framework.
Understood. So how does he frame it?
He views it as a production process with an output, putting convicted criminals in jail. The flow is roughly crime reported, investigation, arrest, trial, sentencing, jail.
And he looks at the cost.
He does. And he points out the potentially staggering effective cost per conviction if you allocate all the resources spent on every investigation, every trial, including the ones that don't result in jail time, only to the small percentage who actually end up incarcerated. He calculates it could be over $1 million per person jailed.
Wow. So what's his production analysis takeaway?
Using his framework, he argues the system often seems limited by the wrong bottleneck, maybe jail cell availability, which costs, say, $80K to build. His point, purely from a process throughput view within his model, is that not jailing someone who effectively costs over $1 to convict because of an $80K cell shortage represents a misuse of the total investment. It's letting a lower-cost downstream constraint limit the output of a much higher-cost upstream process. It's a very stark, data-driven way to look at bottlenecks and resource allocation.
Okay, so whether it's breakfast or something much bigger, applying these principles effectively requires data. It requires indicators.
Yeah,
measurements.
absolutely. Indicators are like the steering wheel on a bicycle, he says. They focus your attention. You need ways to measure your output, your efficiency, your quality. Without them, you're flying blind.
So for our breakfast factory manager, what kind of indicators would they need?
Grove suggests starting a simple, maybe 5 key things to look at daily. What's the sales forecast? How did yesterday's production compare to the forecast? Variance. What's the raw material inventory look like? Eggs, coffee. Is the equipment okay? Toaster working? Do we have the right number of people? And crucially, what's the quality log saying any customer complaints?
And looking at those regularly helps you spot problems early.
Exactly. Before they become big problems. Is inventory dropping too low? Is the toaster starting to act up? Are complaints increasing? You can correct course quickly.
But you shouldn't overreact to every little fluctuation, right?
No, definitely not. That leads to chaos, too. Which is why he introduces the idea of pairing indicators.
Pairing, how does that work?
You measure both an effect and its potential counter-effect. For instance, track inventory levels, but also track the number of stockouts or shortages. If you push inventory down to cut costs, are shortages increasing unacceptably? Pairing helps you find that optimal middle ground, avoiding extremes. Another example, tracking a software project's completion date versus its feature capability. Pushing for speed might reduce features.
That makes sense. And he really stresses applying this measurement discipline to administrative work too, doesn't he? Stuff that's often seen as hard to measure.
Yes, this is key. He insists you measure output, tangible, countable things, not just activity. Don't just measure how busy people look. Measure how many reports were processed, how many customer issues were resolved accurately, how many square feet were cleaned, how many people were hired and onboarded successfully.
And pair those quantity metrics with quality ones.
Always. Number of reports processed paired with error rate. Number of hires paired with 6-month retention or performance ratings.
What's the benefit of doing this for admin work?
Several things. It clarifies objectives. What does good actually look like? It brings objectivity to performance discussions. It allows you to compare the efficiency of different teams doing similar work. And it can even foster a bit of healthy competitive spirit.
He uses the analogy of a black box with windows, right?
Yeah. Visualize your work process as a black box. Inputs and labor go on one side, output comes out the other. Your indicators are the windows into that box. They let you see inside, understand how it's working, and, crucially, predict future output.
which leads naturally to the idea of leading indicators.
These are incredibly valuable. They give you a glimpse of the future in advance. They signal potential problems or successes before they fully materialize, giving you precious time to take corrective action.
But they have to be credible, otherwise you won't act on them.
Absolutely critical. If you don't believe the indicator, you won't change course. Examples could be trends in customer satisfaction scores predicting future sales, or tracking key project milestone completion rates to predict final delivery, or monitoring machine downtime trends to predict future production capacity issues.
He gives that great example of the linearity indicator.
Yes, that's a powerful one. If you have a goal to achieve over a set period, say recruiting 50 people by year end or completing a certain amount of manufacturing output each month, you can plot your actual progress against an ideal straight line from 0 to the target.
If your actual progress line starts falling below that ideal line,
It's a clear visual warning. It shows you're falling behind schedule and will likely need to accelerate significantly, maybe take extraordinary measures to get back on track and hit the target. It battles wishful thinking.
what about trend indicators?
Those are simpler, just tracking output over time, usually against some standard or plan. They help you see patterns and understand why results might be differing from what you expected.
And then there's the stagger chart. That sounds interesting.
Oh, the stagger chart is fantastic. Grove calls it possibly the best means of getting a feel for future business trends. Imagine you make a forecast every month for, say, the next 6 months. The stagger chart plots these successive forecasts on the same graph.
So you can see how the forecast for, say, December has changed from the forecast made in July versus August versus September.
Exactly. You see the forecast, how it evolves over time as you get closer, and eventually you plot the actual result against all those previous forecasts. It really forces forecasters to be rigorous and accountable because their track record is right there visually. He even suggests economists could benefit from using them.
And keeping an archive of all these indicators is useful too.
Definitely. For problem solving, if something goes wrong, you can quickly scan your historical indicator charts to see when things started to depart from the norm, looking for clues about the root cause.
Okay, so with good data from these indicators, you can better control future output. How do factories typically do that?
Well, Grove outlines 2 basic approaches. You can build to order, meaning you only start production when a specific customer order comes in. Think custom furniture, maybe a new car configuration, or our breakfast factory's eat-in customer.
What's the downside there?
The risk is lead time. The customer might have to wait a long time, especially if your competitors using a different model are faster.
And the alternative?
Build to forecast. You produce based on anticipated future demand. This is common for things like Intel chips, consumer goods, the raw materials for our breakfast factory, planning college recruiting numbers, or even software development based on market projections.
The advantage is you can respond quickly when demand hits. The risk.
Getting the forecast wrong. You could end up with warehouses full of unwanted inventory, or you might underestimate demand and miss sales opportunities.
He talks about trying to match the manufacturing flow with the sales flow, right?
Ideally, yes, you have 2 parallel flows. The manufacturing process turning raw materials into finished goods, and the sales process turning prospects into firm orders. The dream is for the finished product and the customer order to arrive at the shipping dock simultaneously. Having both manufacturing and sales involved in forecasting helps align these flows.
But the world isn't perfectly predictable. You need some buffer, some slack.
You absolutely do. And inventory is the most obvious form of slack. Having more inventory allows you to absorb more volatility, more unexpected changes in demand or supply.
But inventory is expensive.
Very. It ties up cash, takes up space, risks obsolescence. So you need to manage it carefully. And ideally, you want to hold your inventory slack at the lowest value stage possible. Remember that principle. Raw materials are cheaper to hold than finished goods.
And he argues that applying these forecasting methods and using indicators like stagger charts is just as valuable for administrative factories.
Absolutely. Things like call centers, HR departments, finance processing. You can use historical data to establish de facto standards for workload, forecast future needs objectively, and staff appropriately. It helps you fight Parkinson's law, the tendency for work to expand, to fill the available time, and really enhance productivity.
Okay, let's shift slightly to assuring quality. We touched on inspection, but how does it fit into the overall flow?
Well, we know acceptable quality at minimum cost requires inspection points, and that critical rule keeps coming back. Reject defective material at the lowest value stage possible.
So you need inspection at different stages.
Typically 3 main stages: incoming inspection, checking raw materials or components as they arrive from suppliers. In-process inspection, checking work as it moves through your steps. And final inspection, checking the finished product or service before it goes to the customer.
What happens at incoming inspection if something's not quite right?
You have choices. You can reject it and send it back. Or, if it's usable but slightly out of spec, you might decide to grant a waiver and accept it, perhaps with a price adjustment. Groves stresses this should be a balanced decision involving maybe engineering, manufacturing, and quality folks, weighing the risks and costs.
And for some things, quality is just non-negotiable.
Absolutely. He uses the example of a pacemaker component. For anything where failure could be catastrophic, reliability has to be paramount. You simply cannot compromise on quality inspection there.
But inspection itself isn't free. It costs money, takes time, interferes with the flow.
Right, so there's a balance. You want to achieve the necessary quality level with the minimum possible disturbance and cost. How much inspection is enough?
He talks about different techniques for inspection, right? Gate versus monitoring.
Yeah. A gate-like inspection is like a checkpoint. Everything stops and gets checked before it can proceed. It's thorough, catches everything right there, but it's slow and creates bottlenecks.
And monitoring.
Monitoring involves taking samples from the ongoing flow. You check a percentage or check periodically. It's much smoother, less disruptive to the flow. The risk, of course, is that some bad items might slip through before your sample catches the problem and you stop the line.
So when would you choose monitoring?
You typically use monitoring when the process is generally stable and problems are less likely. If things start to go wrong, you might switch to a gate temporarily.
He also mentions variable inspections. What's that?
This is about adjusting the frequency or intensity of your inspection based on the current quality results. If quality has been consistently excellent, maybe you inspect less often. If quality starts to dip, you increase the inspection frequency.
Sounds sensible, saves effort.
It does. Lower cost, less interference. But Grove notes it's surprisingly uncommon, maybe due to habit or lack of trust in the process. People tend to stick to fixed inspection plans.
He uses another great non-factory example here, the U.S. Embassy visa process.
Right, the London example again. 1 million applications, 98% approval rate, but huge delays because they were doing a 100% check on every single application.
From a production or quality assurance standpoint, that's inefficient.
Hugely inefficient, he argues. Checking every single item when 98% are already good creates a massive bottleneck for very little gain in finding the 2% problematic ones. He suggests, controversially perhaps, that a sampling approach, maybe like IRS tax audits, could break the logjam. Apply statistical quality control principles. Focus the intensive checks where risk indicators suggest they're needed, rather than checking everything equally.
And how does this idea of variable targeted inspection connect back to managerial work?
It connects directly. When a manager digs into the specifics of a subordinate's work, that is a form of inspection.
Okay.
But if the manager feels the need to check everything, to look over the subordinate's shoulder constantly, that's not inspection, that's meddling.
And meddling is bad.
Meddling creates massive negative leverage, which we'll get to. It signals a lack of trust, it stifles initiative, it prevents the subordinate from learning and growing, and ultimately it reduces their output and the manager's overall effectiveness. Variable inspection, on the other hand, checking in strategically, focusing on key areas or based on performance signals, that's high leverage managerial work.
Okay, that's a great transition. Let's talk explicitly about productivity and managerial leverage. How does Grove define productivity?
Very simply, productivity is output divided by the labor required to generate that output. Output per hour, basically.
And how can you increase it?
2 fundamental ways. 1, you can increase the rate of activity, just work faster, perhaps reorganize work for more efficiency. 2, you can increase the ratio output to activity. This is about working smarter, changing the nature of the work itself to get more output for the same amount of effort.
And that second way, working smarter, relates to leverage.
Exactly. Leverage is the measure of the output generated by a specific managerial activity. High leverage means a particular action you take generates a large amount of output, either your own or your team's.
Like the waiter example.
Or the software engineer using a better tool. A small input yields a big result.
So for a manager trying to be more productive, what are the levers?
Grove identifies 3 ways to boost managerial productivity. 1, increase the rate at which you perform your managerial tasks. Work faster. 2, increase the leverage associated with the tasks you choose to do. 3, shift your mix of activities away from lower leverage ones towards higher leverage ones.
Okay, so what are high leverage activities for a manager? What do they look like?
He gives a few characteristics. First, activities that affect many people. For example, thoughtfully setting up a planning process that makes everyone involved more effective. Timeliness is often key here. Actions where a brief, well-timed, focused input can significantly influence a person's performance or behavior over a long period. Think about a really effective performance review, or taking the time right when it's needed to talk someone out of quitting or guide them through a critical decision. This needs immediate action often, and this can be positive leverage, or if done badly, negative leverage.
Right. And the third type.
When an individual manager supplies unique, key knowledge or information that critically affects the work of a much larger group. Think of the pricing manager whose decision impacts the entire sales force, or the development engineer whose insight solves a problem blocking dozens of others, or specialists like geologists or actuaries, the know-how managers again. Their expertise has huge leverage.
And conversely, there's negative leverage.
Yeah.
Activities that actually reduce output.
Yes, and these can be insidious. Showing up unprepared for a meeting wastes everyone's time, negative leverage. A manager's indecisiveness or waffling on decisions can paralyze a team, huge negative leverage. Even a manager's bad mood or burnout can spread and reduce overall output.
And managerial meddling is a prime example.
Absolutely. It's tempting for managers, especially those promoted for their technical skills, to keep diving into the details they know best. But doing it too much, second-guessing everything, taking over tasks, it exploits their knowledge in a low-leverage way and simultaneously reduces their subordinates' initiative, learning, and ultimately their output. It's a classic negative leverage trap.
So identifying and focusing on the high leverage stuff is crucial.
That's what he calls the art of management. Selecting those 1, 2, or 3 activities from all the things you could do that will provide leverage far beyond the others. It often requires judgment, even intuition, like figuring out which customer complaint signals a deeper systemic issue versus just being a one-off problem.
And one major tool for leverage is delegation.
Essential. A manager's time is their scarcest resource. You simply cannot scale your output without effective delegation.
But it's not just dumping tasks on people, is it?
No, true delegation, Grove argues, requires that the delegator and the delegatee share a common information base and common understanding of how things should operate, shared values, shared objectives, shared methods.
Why is that so important?
Because without that shared context, the manager has to give incredibly detailed, specific instructions for every delegated task, which takes a lot of the manager's time and provides very low managerial leverage. It becomes just another form of micromanaging or meddling.
He also warns about fake delegation.
Yeah, holding on to tasks just because you like doing them, even if someone else could do them, is low leverage. And insincere delegation, pretending to give responsibility but secretly controlling or second-guessing everything, creates immense negative leverage by destroying trust and motivation.
Okay, so wrapping this section up, what's the core message for the listener from these early chapters?
I think it's that by consciously applying these production principles, thinking about your work in terms of output, identifying your limiting steps, using data and indicators wisely, and always seeking higher leverage activities, you can dramatically increase your own effectiveness and the output of anyone you influence, regardless of your formal role.
These ideas, even though they originated decades ago, feel incredibly relevant today. That emphasis on adaptation, continuous learning.
Absolutely. In the face of relentless global competition and the sheer speed of information flow, these foundational principles for managing work and maximizing output are more critical than ever.
And he connects it right back to managing your own career, doesn't he? That line about,
Nobody owes you a career. You own it as a sole proprietor. You are personally responsible for continuously enhancing your value proposition in the global marketplace.
which leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Given that everyone, managers, individual contributors, companies, must adapt or face obsolescence in this environment, how can you apply these very principles we've discussed? Identifying limiting steps, measuring tangible output, relentlessly focusing on high leverage not just to your team's work or your projects, but specifically to the active management and enhancement of your own competitive value. What are the high leverage activities for your personal career development right now?
That's definitely something to chew on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Andrew Grove's really foundational management wisdom.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.